We're going to repeat the process this afternoon for the next hour or so that Cassandra introduced this morning with Susan, using the 1-2-4-all process. And if you could direct your attention to the green sheet, which is labeled Afternoon 1-2-4-all, question number 1. We're going to begin the process by asking you to consider the data elements that you think would be most critical for ACL to collect, that is for you to collect on your behalf and then be able to share with ACL, contributing to the environment for performance assessment and performance measurement. Just a couple of things about data elements. I'm a researcher by training, data man. You know, I got a big D on my chest when I expose my T-shirt. I like to wallow in data. A lot of people think that's strange. I'm accustomed to that. But I do understand that a lot of people are not, they didn't become caregivers, social workers, administrators of human service programs because they share that predilection for wallowing in data. They're much more service oriented. So not everybody's comfortable with measurement and assessment. Certainly when you start using terms like statistics and analysis, that can be kind of scary. So what we're trying to do is to get your input to involve you from the beginning in the identification of things that you think should be tracked, that you want to see tracked, that relate to how respite is viewed, how it's presented in a variety of forums, not just amongst ourselves, but perhaps in writing of future grants, perhaps in the formulation of future policy. So think of this as this is a non-trivial exercise. We're looking for measurement elements that in fact will be the framework through which and by which respite is described numerically and in terms of policy. So I don't want to make it scary because this is going to be a multi-year, multi-step process. But it is important that we perhaps get past any apprehension we might harbor about the accountability and the assessment and the performance measurement process, and work together to come up with some common data elements that we can all contribute to the extent possible. So with that as a preamble, data elements being simply those things that one can observe, measure, count, assign some either qualitative or quantitative value to. Again, that's not the rocket science part. That's simply identifying the things that we want to be, the terms that we want to be using when we talk about the number of this, the percentage of that, the quality of whatever services that we're pursuing. So let's jump right into it now with the minute of silence, where we self-reflect, and we'll do this for about a minute. We're changing roles here. Cassandra's going to be the timekeeper. So 3, 2, 1, go with the following question. What are the 2 or 3 most important data elements that grantees should track to demonstrate the importance and effectiveness of the Lifespan Respite program? Go. Okay, thanks for your diligence. Let's look at some results now. This is the point where the dreaded time where you must identify a spokesperson for your group, maybe some spokespersons other than the ones from this morning. And where do we want to start? Anybody want to volunteer? Okay, we have a winner.
We the winner. Chicken dinner. Okay, first of all, I think that a lot of the work's already been done, so use the work that's there, and that since the respite grant is under ACL, we already collect data for, or the aging programs do. So start with the same demographics. The basic demographics need to be collected. Then on your caregiver, we need to know what ADLs the care recipient requires assistance with. Then also, I think that a self-assessment by the caregiver, if it was a good tool, a short tool, that the data from that self-assessment could be powerful if it was collected on everyone. And then, of course, just gathering the basics that we know we can gather. How many unduplicated caregivers we serve, how many hours of respite, what was the cost, how many providers, how many trainings, just all of that basic information that we already collect under the other ACL programs. And if we could streamline that, you know, using sometimes the same terminology and all, then it gives us a better opportunity to pair some of that data that is there under ACL and use it to use that shared data to get the message across to keep this program going.
So that obviously a lot of the stuff that we're already collecting, and we'll use the term administrative data for that, the kind of the basic records that you would have in a file if you were going to start a service plan, and then moving into other related areas, particularly those associated with the caregiver needs and a self-assessment. That's an interesting approach. Do we have another group at that table, or?
Well, I saw this.
Oh, okay, okay. We'll keep volunteering until we
I'm
run out of
elected again, so
okay.
we had a lot of discussion, but I think the one really cool part was measuring the number of caregivers that were able to find and use respite when needed. Good one. And over here, another hand.
Thank you.
Okay, one thing that we talked about was like barriers to utilizing respite. What's a caregiver's barriers to utilizing the respite?
It's a good one, and it's going right back here.
The things that we determined, I mean, there's more than three, is number of caregivers served, number of hours provided, cost of respite service provision, the number of paid hours versus the number of unpaid hours, meaning family coordinating care and they don't get paid for all that, which populations are served the most, elderly, children, so forth. How do they utilize? Some of them have a hard time utilizing the respite service. They leave, but they're sitting there in their car while respite's going on in the house. Let's see, what level of stress was achieved anecdotally through respite service, or were they able to lower their stress level through that provision?
Very good.
Thank you. I know there are
Any
more.
other volunteers? We have another winner.
Like most people said, we said how many people are being served. We said if you're doing a voucher program, the percentage of vouchers that's not actually being used, what's being returned, and if they're not using their full amount, why are they not using their full amount? And then we also talked about the quality of life after respite for the caregiver and both the care recipient.
It is interesting in these conversations that I have routinely with folks, the number of times that issue comes up about why can't we get caregivers to use respite, and then what are they doing with their respite? So those are two biggies. So,
Just kind of, because we said a lot of the stuff that's already been said, but respite opportunities across the age and disability spectrum. So much of our discussion always happens around older adults, but we have children with mental illness and OPWDD and autism and all those different, and to track how well we're actually reaching those groups and what the respite opportunities are and maybe the utilization of those.
More? I'm going as fast as I can, Ray. Who had their hand up? There you go.
And you didn't need to hurry. So a lot of what we talked about were some of the same things that I think a lot of other people talked about in the beginning. And then years ago, when Lifespan Respite started, Greg Link, who was our predecessor 2 times ago, used to ask us the question, what is there before, or what is there now that wasn't there before? And trying to get at the idea of demonstrating the effectiveness of the Lifespan Respite program beyond the outputs of people that we're serving, but looking at it from the partnerships and the things that you've leveraged and what has come about because of this particular program. In North Carolina several years ago, we don't do it anymore, but we had a program called Progress Check that was developed within our public health department, and it was really a spreadsheet of sorts, but it produced for us a graphic element that allowed us to see when we dropped a pebble, for example, to have a meeting about something. 6 months later, you could track, maybe I had a meeting with Easter Seals about this new respite program, and 6 months later, we had another meeting and found out that Easter Seals has now adopted the voucher program that we started. That's just a made-up kind of example. But it was an idea to be able to track when, within a particular program, when you do something, what is the result of that came about because of our efforts within the Lifespan Respite program. And I think because we have so little funding within this, it's really quite amazing to see and hear what everybody has done with very little funds. And it's things that are there now that weren't there before. And yes, we have to toss a lot of rocks. But it was, it's a matter of being able to say, this rock you tossed 7 months ago now has resulted in this coming up and happening. And so I don't know if there's, just to throw that out there, a little different way to look at a different element of the program itself.
Thank you. Any others? I know this.
Well, I just want, may I make a comment? Because we are charged with changing systems and working with systems. And so that, to me, is directly related to the legislation. Good. Over here.
And thank you. We also included employment status for the caregiver. Again, going back to it impacts the employers, and if we can show that in a very tangible way, it could have a very tangible benefit for the caregiver ultimately.
Thank you.
Okay, any that we missed? Any reactions or comments?
Right over here.
Yep.
Sorry, this is just for my notes and my edification, please. Caregiver self-assessment, what do we mean? Because I think I know what it means, but I want to know from y'all.
Well, it's several things. And, I think you should look at both how caregivers rate themselves and on, exactly. Right. Okay. Yeah, I think typically it's usually things, they call it burden, and it's things like stress or, number of hours of sleep missed or, actually somatic conditions that result as a result of missing sleep and overworking and things like that. But there's objective measures and there's self-report, and I think it's important to look at both. But it would be really great if there were standardized tools that we could use across the nation because I think we're all out there developing our own or researching things that have already been put together. That's what we've done. So I think standardization would be awesome.
I was thinking about the standardized tools too, and I worked with Cassandra at Friends on annotating different things that people could use. That might be something the work group wants to think about, giving a selection of tools that it sounds like you already use them, and taking a look at them to make sure they merit your use, and then having some choices to allow you to compile data.
Just something to add, Heather, might be looking at social isolation. I hear that a lot from our parents raising children with special health care needs, and interpersonal relationships, marriage, church attendance, things like that seem to often be highly impacted as well.
We are in the process of finalizing a caregiver assessment.
Who's speaking?
Through our family caregiver, sorry, Cassandra.
No.
Through our family caregiver support program, not directly tied to Lifespan Respite, but my understanding from Greg Link is that this will be the first in the nation that is solely a caregiver assessment form, not for the care recipient. We have that obviously because of the Older Americans Act funding. But my program manager is working on that, and she has been consulting with folks in Colorado actually, who evidently have some excellent evidence-based programming that they do. So she is doing a version of the Zaret Burden Scale. It is solely focusing on the caregiver. And of course, you know, the information about the care receiver has to be there because it's dependent upon the ADLs of the care receiver. But we are happy to share any information. She's getting ready to launch that. We are in the final draft stage, and I'll be happy to share that with anyone if you want to contact us in South Carolina. We are really focusing on the caregiver as the client because for us especially, it has been, I've been in my office 10 years, and it has been a process ongoing to remind people your client is the caregiver, not the care recipient. Everybody wants to revert back to the care recipient. So if you're interested in that information, we're happy to share. Thank you.
Right here.
We also have spent the last year searching for a tool to use for the caregiver, and we also believe the caregiver is the client, so you have to look at it differently. Have developed a tool. We mirrored several tools that were out there, but they're not very many. They're few and far between. They're long tools, but who has time to do a long tool? You're talking about a little bit of money, and you want to spend your time doing, you know, what's going to help the caregivers. But the other thing is there's a American Psychological Association has a caregiver tool, self-assessment tool on their website that anybody can look at, and it's for caregivers across the board, so you might want to look at that also. But I think that it would be easy to do a simple standardized tool that the caregiver does that would collect some really powerful information.
The American Medical Association also has one. They have one. I think it's the same one.
I know that Jill has a question, but I did want to mention something. Did anyone have more on systems change, data elements for system change? And I wanted you to know before I hand this mic over, and I'm almost there, that there are some good, well-researched tools on measuring collaboration. I've become aware of them, and I'll make sure that everyone, you know, through Jill has a copy if they want it.
And maybe that's going to address this, but one of the requirements of the grant, of course, is to be working with a coalition. And of course, I think that's a really good idea and imperative. But in order to, how do we prove that the use of a coalition helps you to achieve your goals and objectives? how could we how can we do measurements to get to that piece as well? Part of that would help us with sustainability, I think, which is one of the...
Sorry, Jill, I took that away.
Well, just a couple of points on caregiver assessment, which is a little bit apart from what we're talking about today. But for those of you who are looking for caregiver assessments, the Family Caregiver Alliance has done an annotated bibliography of all the caregiver assessments that are out there. And it's you can link to it from our website or go directly to caregiver.org. If you're really interested in doing caregiver assessment, it's out there. On the collaboration, we're about to release, hopefully in the next month or two, an updated new fact sheet on tools for collaboration that may have some links to documents and tools that help you measure how well your coalition is working. So that might be helpful to you.
Okay, well, as we wrap this, it was interesting, actually, in the final few comments, that some folks who were actually engaged in this work at a parochial level within their own programs or their own states. So not only, I think, have we identified some general areas of measurement and then some specific categories of measurement, but we've identified some potential sources of examples of tools that might be shared and used as the seeds to carry the process forward. Okay, we'll start the next question. This is actually now that we've identified a number of areas where measurement might occur, even specific elements to track, now is your opportunity to share with ACL your ideas about how you might want to influence the process by which this moves forward. This next question is the process question, and we'll begin with the minute of silence. So what I'd like for you to do for the next minute is to reflect on the following question. What key factors do you want ACL staff to keep in mind as they work with ARCH and the LRP grantees to develop a tool or tools for measuring performance outcomes? Okay, yeah, hands up. Those, the intrepid among us? Next round of volunteers to share? Okay.
Hi. Our suggestion, I think we came to consensus as a group, is that some states collect data specific to respite based on what they have been doing for different programs, and that we develop some type of timeline so that everybody shares what they're currently collecting, so that ACL and ARCH together can maybe establish a uniform consistency with grantees for data collection, and that's a place to have that baseline start. Then you can begin to define what some of these major issues are that we're trying to look at too. What? Oh, training and information about training too. They want to make sure we talk about that too.
Okay, great.
Okay, we came up with a couple. First one was to make sure the elements of the tool are relevant to all states, because we all do things a little differently, so we want to make sure it's apples to apples. Another one is to make sure the standards or the elements are clearly defined and understood by each state. So again, to provide consistency on the data. And then as far as the tools are embedded in it, to make sure that we use what's out there kind of as a starting point, so we're not starting from the bottom. And then to make sure that they're easy, simple, and quick. Not real lengthy if it's like a caregiver assessment tool.
Apples to apples is a tall order. Maybe we should settle for fruit, at least in the beginning, but
Well, as an addendum to your easy, simple, and quick, we thought it was important to distinguish among the differences and commonalities that each state has, both in the starting environment in providing services, the history of support from the state and government sources, but also in collecting the data for performance measures to realize that it's not always the things you can count that are the most important, that it's the soft research, the soft outcomes, the qualitative information that will not be so easy and quick, but will give you the true picture of the impact on the intervention of respite upon those individuals.
And before Emily takes that, I just want to say I object to the use of the word soft, because I think qualitative data is hard. And so Susan's a qualitative researcher, and but thank you for bringing it up.
Just to add to that, one of the things we discussed was the importance of cultural competency in developing the tools, not only just translating them, but actually making sure that they mean, what we hope they mean for the different cultures, so that we can use those across the state.
Yeah, similar to what other groups have said, the ease of access is very important. Inclusivity and cultural competency has to be in place. And accessibility was a big thing that we talked about, not just online, having it in a variety of languages, different pieces like that, so it really is something that everybody can do. Receiving the outcomes and being able to get the information on what our data is showing was something that we discussed. Yeah, partnering with different agencies for data analysis, and are we responsible for disseminating these surveys or tools, and then are we also responsible to evaluate that data and come up with those pieces, or is that something that someone else would do? What does it look like as far as admin time and the time that a caregiver would take on the survey? And then I also think it would be important to be able to transfer this to the greater use of the state, not necessarily just programs that we work with within the Lifespan Respite grantee programs, but really being able to have it be something that across the nation, any respite program is able to use this to evaluate their standards.
Thanks, Sil. Over here. Anyone?
You've already said a lot of it, but one was to, the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid. And the other was that if we just collect basic information to where not collecting too much information, so that then whoever, whether it's the general accounting office or whoever evaluates this program, can have enough data to evaluate its value, because some things you just can't put a monetary value to, but the right evaluators can take the evidence from the data that is collected and give it meaning. And I think that's really important for this program, so that in the future it can hopefully not be a grant program anymore and be a fully funded program for the state.
Thank you.
Sorry, data should support the purposes of the law. It is written expressly in the law. Susan pointed it out. If the data collected supports the law, we have proven what we need to.
Well said.
So you're talking about collecting data on systems change. Yeah. Right. Thanks.
Our group answer is very simple. Ditto.
Any others? Any other comments?
We also said maybe try a mobile app or something that's going to really be low burden if you're collecting data directly from the caregiver. So just 1, 2, 3 questions they answer on a tablet or mobile phone, and you collect that a couple times a year, and you've got many, many data points at the end of the year.
Okay, any others? One more. Thanks, Cass.
Most of ours were covered, except
we wanted to make sure that it really was the needs of the individual, person-centered, person-directed, not just a one-size-fits-all. And in addition to that, the people that were actually collecting the data need a lot of coaching and support on the front end, just to make sure that what's happening in our part of the world is happening in your part of the world in the same standardized way.
That will help you, Ray, when you talk about TA needs in a minute.
Yeah. Okay. So a couple of themes that came through to me was beginning with kind of an assessment of the state of the art or the state of the current practice of what folks are gathering at the local level. There's probably a variety there, but it certainly would be a good place to start. The need for striving for simplicity, things that are transferable and translatable across sites and across different program models. What are some others there that you write so small but so well, I can't, I'm old, I have to get closer.
Did you mention the universality of elements, that they're relevant and
Yeah, the relevance of the elements to support the law and other measures relating to well-being of caregiver, possibly care receiver.
something about inclusivity, accessibility, like languages, reading level.
Yeah.
So we're not collecting data of people who love
I wanted to ask a question just to the group, if this is okay. What are your greatest fears about this whole project? Because we have some federal project officers in the room. Does anyone have a fear? Or right over here, Emily, she's terrified. Here we go.
So I'm a hybrid. I'm an academic as well as a community development and systems change person. And I embody a lot of fears here because I've seen both sides. But one is fear that we burden folks in the trenches. Second fear is that we get data that's not usable, a lot of garbage or dirty data. And the third is that it's too academic. And I say that because I'm a curious academic and I love collecting data. And that's how I started with my evaluation work. And the people in the trenches were like, are you nuts? And, it was really a burden. So those are my three fears.
And I share those fears, and I particularly feel it's critical that whatever information is collected, hopefully it's good information, and that it be provided to the rest of the world in an understandable, plain English way, so that, because that loop has to be in there.
Yeah, another part of that, actually, I think it was a point that Ellen made, was that the desirability of there being a two-way street, that if the field is going to go to the extent of gathering and reporting data, that there should be adequate and comprehensive analysis and the results shared back so that you can then use the results of that for program improvement and competing for funding or whatever else it might be. Okay.
Any other comments or fears? I think we've hit, when?
When I think about our Lifespan Respite program, we as a state, as I'm sure many of all of you do, we do several different things. And so it's a matter of making sure we understand what aspect of the program we're collecting data on. A lot of us do actual respite provision, we do actual vouchers or things like that, but there's also a whole lot of other things we do that aren't related to a voucher. And so being able to look at, if we're getting information on caregiver demographic, what is the discrete population you want us to gather that on? That we don't find out later, we wanted a different population than what you did. And it isn't representative of all of what we're doing in our programs across the state. It might be that we take distinct points in certain populations. That's just a thought.
Thanks. I'm a data head. I really like data, but you know what? Data is also dangerous. If we start to share some of our data points with some people that don't understand the mission, we may have to explain the mission, and it may be in danger. Let me just use an example. For example, one agency may have only served 75 unique people in the last 6 months. Well, someone looking at that may say, 75 people, why are you even in existence? So my concern is if the data is used in the wrong way or not created with a narrative, it could come back to bite us.
Hence the need for a mix of quantitative and qualitative.
Thank you, Ray.